Wondering what's going on today? We have play expert coming in and we need to maintain our fitness. Wait, has the podcast already started? Oh, good news, guys. We have Pooja Rai coming in today. Oh, she's already here. Okay, there's some magic going around here, but we'll get to that soon. Welcome to the third podcast of the Silent Entrepreneurs. We have with us Pooja Rai, and the founder of the NGO Anthill Creations, which is bringing smile to children all over India. She is a winner of the GP Birla Fellowship, and she has also been awarded your Ashoka Changemaker Award, along with being an author, a TEDx speaker, and much more. I will give over the mic to Pooja, though we don't have a mic to Pooja now, so she can introduce herself better.
All right. Hi. I started this organization almost 5 years back, and I'm an architect. I graduated from IIT Kharagpur. Was working as a product manager before I took this venture full time. So what we typically do is build playgrounds for children using scrap tires and waste material. We've built close to 300 playgrounds now, and yeah, that's what we do.
So playgrounds for children sounds amazing, right? We especially feel the lack of dirt in Bangalore, right? We want to play now. There's almost no playgrounds per se left. We have to go and pay to just play. That sounds bad, right? For playing you have to pay. That's kind of a sad story. And you are enabling people to kind of build playgrounds, is it, or what exactly is involved in this whole process?
So the larger vision that we have is make play accessible for everyone. We strongly believe that play is a necessity and not a luxury. So like you said, we don't have to pay for it. And the idea started when I was back in my college. I saw children playing with these broken cement pipes, and they were using slippers to play badminton, and that's what triggered in me that as a designer, what value can I add to them? And I decided to build a playground for them along with my friends. At that point in time, we didn't know whether it is a big problem, what do we want to do. We just wanted to give happiness to those 250 children in that center. So we ended up building our first playground even before we had graduated from college. And after we graduated, like over the next 1 year, we received so many requests from across the country asking us to come and build such a playground for them. And that is when we realized that this is a much bigger problem.
Mm-hmm.
We all as a society focus so much on classroom education and academic learning, but we do not give importance to play. We do not look at why play is important for the holistic growth of a child.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what we wanted to do. And like you mentioned, right, like a city like Bangalore, we have so many dump yards, these dead spaces in the city. So that's what we're trying to do. We are identifying these dead spaces in the city, which eventually become dump yard, and with the help of government, trying to clean them up and make them community parks. So not just for children, but also adults who come with their children to come and spend time outdoors.
Right. It's a very beautiful notion, and you started this in college itself. I mean, the journey must have been pretty crazy. How did you even go about doing that? Like, you identified a spot and you decided to just build a playground there? As simple as that?
The very first playground was basically that center was in our college campus itself, and I used to go there to give sweets or food on our birthdays, festival, and we wanted to build playground there. The first time we went and spoke to the chairperson there, she said, what tires, what playgrounds, no, it's not safe. But we convinced her that, this is an amazing idea and children will absolutely love it. We didn't have funding, so we thought, okay, let's get a few tires together and build a playground. Fortunately, Michelin agreed, they loved our idea and they agreed to sponsor tires and a little bit of funding. And it was completely DIY, all our friends used to come and lift those tires because they were very heavy, and we built it ourselves with our own hands.
Okay.
And what we had designed on paper and what actually came on the ground were completely different things. So it was an amazing experience. Like everybody else was preparing for placements and their thesis, and here we were trying to bunk classes and make sure this happens. But I think there's this another different kind of a joy when you really want to do it and it's not an assignment and nobody has told you to do it, but you just like even the team that we formed, the five of us, we never had to sort of divide tasks amongst ourselves. We just knew, like we just cared for it. कि आज ये करना है तो we will figure out how to do it.
And you were having fun. I mean,
Yeah.
what more do you require, right?
Yeah, I mean we all have this thing, right? Like that before graduating you want to do something for the college, and today, like even after like it's been 6 years I graduated, I still like go to that place whenever I go back to my college. So yeah.
Fond memories for sure.
Absolutely.
And the children must be grown up now, like 6 years. They still recognize you?
They do surprisingly, because while we were building the playground, we used to spend a lot of time with them, hearing their stories of how their day went, or like what fight they had today. So we spent quite a lot of time with them. And I remember on convocation when I went there with my parents, there were like hundreds of kids, like running and saying Puja Didi, Puja Didi. Like there was this different kind of a love and pride that I could feel at that point in time. So yeah.
It does sound beautiful. I mean, you have a crowd of young children just cheering you on. You can't ask for anything.
Yeah, and a lot of these times, and similar experiences in many of our other playgrounds as well. And that makes me think such a simple thing. It's just a playground. It didn't cost a lot. It can give so much happiness and like so much hope to those children. And that's what keeps me motivated.
and there's a special thing you mentioned, that tires,
Yeah.
right? You made the playground just out of tires. So was that something you had planned, or how did that, even the thought process evolve there?
I mean, so as architects, we always think of making sustainable designs.
Right.
And like first playground, we used tires because we were students, we didn't have money. We thought, let's get a few tires together. Tires don't come for free.
You realized that afterwards?
But yeah, that's why we built the first playground with tires. And one of my friends had interned in Morocco, and he had seen how we can upcycle waste material. So it was sort of like the idea came from there as well. But we still, even after 6 years, we continue to use tires because it is an amazing product. It's not a simple rubber; it's a complex rubber structure. Very, it's like Lego blocks, and we can make like hundreds of designs out of it. Very abstract, so it gives children an opportunity to create their own games around what we design. Very durable because trucks are made to take like tons of a load of weight on trucks. But now we're not just limited to tires. We try and use other industrial waste, but make sure that we do not compromise on the quality and durability of the playgrounds. And we are exploring more material. We have used bamboo. We are also using plastic sheets and plastic blocks because that is another big waste that is there.
So you're trying to recycle products, right?
Yes, and like it's not like a few hundred or a few thousand playgrounds will solve the problem of tires. But I feel what is happening is by seeing these examples, there's a lot of awareness which is happening, and for children in such early years when they I remember in one of the playgrounds, this child comes and he was saying to his teacher that, ma'am, this is the 3R concept that you taught in the class. So what they learn in theory, they are seeing in front of them.
Right. And the whole experience involves children, right? You involve them in all the building steps and take ideas from them. That's basically how this goes?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it just came from being a designer and also being a product manager, where you keep user at the center of everything. Right. And when we design playgrounds, we try to involve not just children but the entire community from the very beginning, even before the design takes place.
Right.
So we do these activities where we play games with children to understand what their perception of play is. Because typically when you see a playground, you see a slide, swing and a seesaw, right? Like hasn't changed over years.
Right.
So we try and understand how we can make these designs very, very contextual.
Right.
And we've seen how when we do these activities with children from urban areas,
Mhm.
they're more interested in things like car, rocket, and when we do it with rural children from rural areas, they're more interested in things like elephant, horses, because those are the stories that they hear around us. So it's very, very contextual. And if we, like manufacture something out of plastic and just go install and say, play on it,
Right.
right? That's not what we want to do. We want to give them what they can sort of like, what they will actually like and appreciate.
What they will connect with.
Exactly.
And of course, kids come up with creative ways to play. So just giving them a horse itself, someone might start riding it. Someone might say tug of war. I don't know, like whatever, right? So they will have their own creative process. And I think that is a concept that you guys follow, and that is to educate people through play, right? Bring in those cognitive skills,
Yeah.
and provide for a place for them to grow from the childhood, right? So again, I love the way you mentioned that what people educating them they see in practical life. Right? That's something that's actually somewhat missing in education system right now in India, but hopefully it's improving, right? And you're already doing that, so that's lovely. And coming to your journey, so this started in 2015,
Yeah.
right? So you actually went and worked for corporate for 1 year, meanwhile, and then again came back to this whole process. Was it so?
So I've never worked in a corporate. I was working with a startup, and that was like a campus placement. I actually loved my job. I think product management is pretty interesting, like a good mix of tech design, strategy. So it was very interesting. But after a year, when we received hundreds of requests, I felt guilty that there is a need out there, and I'm not able to do it because even if I had time on the weekends, I used to spend that studying about product management versus this. So there was very little time that we could give to handle. And after a year, I think we were published in one of the newspapers, and in a day I got almost 50 calls.
Okay.
And that was sort of a market validation as well, that there is a need
Right.
of what we're doing. And that created that trigger. And one of my out of the 5, one of my friends, she also wanted to venture full time into it. So we decided, we actually thought okay, let's make a let's take a calculated risk, let's make those list of pros and cons. And that went on for like almost 3-4 months, and one day we just decided ki yaar soch ke nahi hoga, let's just jump into it. And I hadn't even told my parents, honestly. My parents thought ki theek hai, quarter life crisis is going on, she'll be back on track soon. So that was a big, I think, chaos that happened where people were like, why are you ruining your career, right? Like you've got like a product management job even without an MBA, and you're giving up all of that for this. But what gave me clarity was the long-term vision that I had for myself. I didn't see myself 20 years from now, say, heading a product in Google or a big MNC. I wanted to work in the development sector to create direct impact on people who really need it.
Right.
And I think that aligned. So, yeah.
And as you mentioned, there would be some friction, of course, with your family. You're living a well-set job and something that you obviously loved also, right? There's that dual mentality that comes in at the start, especially, right? Do we want to do this or not? There's this fear factor that is always at play. But we feel that it's something that needs to be just done at a certain point, right? When you go about doing it, you'll actually realize what the scenario situation is. And for you yourself, as you mentioned, you had a validated idea because you were already receiving calls from multiple people. Right? Still a bit of a scary process getting into this, especially the NGO part, right? So how did that happen? Like, so what was the process involved there? If you can just go through that, setting up an NGO and contacting people.
So when we took this, I feel as an entrepreneur, you set out to solve a problem. You don't decide whether I want to run a non-profit or a for-profit, right? Those are just legal entities.
Right.
So the problem that we wanted to solve was give play to every child, and we felt the need is much larger in government schools, in children from low income communities, and they didn't have money to pay for it, so we had to set up as a non-profit. That's why we did it. We didn't go with a very typical. We didn't have any background, say in the sector, and knew absolutely nothing. 3 years into it, we realized that as a early stage non-profit, there are no incubators for you. There was absolutely no support for early stage non-profits, because typically non-profits are run by people who made their money in life. So that was a new transition happening. I would say fortunately or serendipity, like that year, IIM Bangalore started its first non-profit incubator, and we had to get into it. Not just for money, but I think more like a validation for our parents that they're doing something worthwhile. But that was a big support. I feel like we got mentors, things we would have taken like years to learn. We learned in a few months, few weeks, and I know people say that fail fast, learn fast. I personally feel that if we can learn from someone who's gone through a similar experience, if we have right set of mentors, you can just avoid those mistakes and move faster. So that's what I think helped us. The first year was, I think, just chaotic. We didn't know that there were a lot of these unexpected things that happen, and they are bound to happen. But we didn't give up. We had to sort of we had decided that we will take it forward. So we tried everything, and I would say the first 6-7 months, it was just friends, family, network, everybody. We reached out to everyone and just hustle. I think a lot of people ask me, how do you get the initial set of customers. I think there is no one set way that will be applicable to everyone. The product is very different, the market is very different. So yeah, I think just the fact that you keep trying.
Right, hustle. That's a keyword there. Right, sleepless nights. Just,
and it's all worth it. I feel
yes.
right. When you decide to choose this path of entrepreneurship, I think you have to have that strong determination to not give up.
True. And there's a point worth noting here. You mentioned that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. That is very apt, right? You can always learn from what has been experienced by other people. You don't have to go and try it out again. That's something that people do tend to miss out, right? Look at the real world example out there and gain inspiration from them and understand the dynamics of what you're working with. That's true. But so this NSRCL was the platform for you, right? That's the launchpad that you had joined, right? So it allowed you to go and network and connect with people. But during that first year, how many playgrounds did you actually build, right? If you remember the numbers.
Of course I do. We completed December 2017 with 25 playgrounds, and that was actually a big achievement. I remember we were making targets for next year, and 100 seemed too big. Now we're already at 300. If COVID wouldn't have happened, we would have probably built 1,000 playgrounds this year. But we've also learned that it's not just about those numbers. What we're trying to do is basically empower people to be able to build their own playgrounds, and that has started to happen. We build one playground in, say, one community, and we see how people in the vicinity start either requesting us or making efforts themselves.
Right.
People have now started to understand why play is very important. All of our education is becoming gamified education, and learning doesn't have to be any boring or rote learning anymore. It should be fun.
You have White Hat Junior now. I can't tell exactly on that. No comments there. We don't want to get political here. But so there's a gradual shift in the mentality of even the parents today. Previously, it used to be all about learning. You need to get into that IIT. We have seen some sort of change in the mentality, right, over the years. And is that something you actually wish to bring forth in other parents to kind of have them go and experience this themselves by first of all building the playground, and then go and actually have their kids work on things as such, right? Experiment and grow. it's a sort of an evolution process that's happening there. Is that something you people do target?
Yes. So, I mean, I feel technology is very powerful and it has to come into learning and play as well. And with most of the education going online this year, I feel the quality of the education will improve. But what we should not lose in that is the experience, right? Like the things that you learn by doing something with your own hands instead of just swiping screen left and right. So I strongly believe that hybrid play or hybrid learning is an amazing solution. And when we build these playgrounds, we do engage communities, parents to come and build these playgrounds with us. And it's actually a lot of fun, right? Like you have a weekend, you would want to come learn how to drill, how to paint a ball, and that's an experience. A lot of children come and do these paintings, and I have not like almost every child I've met loves painting, loves colors, and we're giving that opportunity to them. And when children, even if they've done like one corner of a painting, they'll say this is my playground, like that ownership that they have. And how they take care of it is just very interesting to see how children see that. So we do engage communities. I feel like if parents start understanding that why this is important for a child, they will start creating their own solutions inside the home. It doesn't have to be an outside park. It could be in a home, in your backyard, in a school setting, in a community center, laundromats, malls, anywhere, right? Like play should become a part of our lives, and that's what we're trying to do.
I especially love a quote that you have mentioned multiple times. The moment you start trying to teach kids how to play, there's something wrong there, right? I love that quote. Like it's so apt.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to solve a puzzle and you come and like solve it for me. It's no more fun for me. So you basically, when you tell a child that do it this way, you're taking away that opportunity from that child to experience it themselves. And if you tell them how to do it, they'll forget about it. But if they figure it out, right, even if it takes a little bit of more time, I think they will remember it for long, and they will also be more engaged, more interested in it.
Right.
So yeah.
So how is the scale happening though, right? So you actually go and select a community leader, is that so? And you ask them to build more playgrounds, or it's by themselves that they go forward and start doing it for the community out there?
So we do get a lot of requests on our website, where there is a requirement or where people want to build a playground. It could be their own school, or it could be a school nearby, or something where they sort of volunteer. So those people become our community champions who sort of lead the entire project, and we sort of help them with the technical details, design, engagement. Our team also goes and helps them get the material. So typically we have like a 4-step process. The first step is basically getting the details, which the community champion helps us get. Then our team of designers puts together a design which is contextual to the requirements that we have received. Then we do the pre-planning, where even before we've gone to the site, we make sure like the material is in place. And then the final step is the construction. So we complete a playground in 5 days, and we engage community during the construction. And post that, basically, like there's a quality check, and also this year-long sort of maintenance or an engagement that we keep with the community to make sure that they're using the playground in the best way, they're taking care of it, and also like sort of transferring the ownership from us to the community themselves. Because we are building hundreds of playgrounds, and we want the community or the schools to start taking care of it, because ultimately we can build playgrounds, but it is them who will sort of use it.
Right. And if you have to personally get involved in 300 plus playgrounds, that's just impossible, right? It's self-sustainable is the best way you can go about it. And if as you mentioned, if they start taking care of it, you don't have to worry about anything else. But you can just concentrate on educating more people out there. That's pretty cool. And are there corporates involved in this whole process?
Yes, so most of our funding is actually through corporates as part of their CSR.
Right.
So we have some amazing corporates like KPMG, Salesforce, Cisco, Britannia, like Tata Steel, people who have sponsored these playgrounds, and also our new product, Play in a Box. And they basically support with money and also like the resources that they have, and then we identify a community which is in need of such an intervention and will benefit the most out of it, and then we go ahead and build the playground.
Okay, that's good to hear. There's so many companies involved, actively involved, from what I hear. Right? And you also mentioned play in a box.
Yes.
Okay, so is that something that came around during COVID time?
Yes. So when COVID happened, we had to halt all our operations.
Right.
There were half-built playgrounds, and we had to fly back our team. And we knew that post-lockdown we'll continue to build playgrounds, but it made us question that we didn't know when schools will reopen again. And when we were completing the playground earlier, even before the inauguration, there were hundreds of kids playing in the playground. Now we used to complete a playground and it was like so empty.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah, and then we were like, yeah, children will use it eventually, but how can we add value at this point in time? So then we thought, and also because we work very closely with the communities and we also did COVID relief during the lockdown, we realized that children felt stuck inside their homes. Imagine we felt so stuck, and kids have so much energy in them, they felt just trapped in those four walls. So we thought that if children can't come out, let's take play to their homes. And this new product is actually very simple. These are just games, open-ended games, which gives children an opportunity to play in various ways. So it has like a physical activity game, it has a art-based, creative expressions-based game, it has a social-based. So even in their homes, they continue to sort of play, engage with other family members. And the idea is that after a year of missing school, especially for children who do not have digital devices, and most of the children from low-income communities do not have digital devices, for them to remain curious and be willing to come back to school after after a year is what we were trying to do. And we got amazing response. The first set of boxes was actually just a few of these plastic games that we bought and gave to children. But then we realized that they're having fun, but they're not learning from those games. So then we started designing our own games, which were much cheaper and sustainable, and also had a learning component to it. So yeah, we've already distributed close to 5,000 such boxes, and I think that will continue to sort of, even when schools reopen, it can become a part of their curriculum, which will help them learn in more fun ways.
So it's an evolution that COVID brought in. So
yes,
good evolution brought, right?
I think COVID brought a lot of innovation in a lot of companies.
That's true. I mean, so major companies have now decided, okay, let's do work from home.
Yes.
It's beneficial for them also.
Yeah.
It's good to see that COVID is not all negative, right? It's heartening to hear that. And of course, playing outside is an integral part, but now it has completely stopped, unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
Do you see something improving along the way with relation to how online games also come in? And is that something that you want to focus on?
So currently we're not so much focused on online games, because I feel there are a lot of people already creating enough products along those lines. But like I mentioned before, I strongly believe that hybrid play and hybrid learning is the future. I mean, Pokemon Go is one example that a lot of people did accidents, but but that is one such a great example of how technology brought people outside their homes, and like a perfect example of a physical and a virtual setting. So a lot of these AR games are so amazing, but I think it should be more than just just swiping the screen. Technology doesn't mean just a screen. It's a lot more powerful. But we are focusing at this point in time on the niche that we have, the experience. I feel the medium can evolve over time, but if we know the very basics at the core of child psychology, the learnings that they have, and with every year, I would say our understanding of this problem is getting deeper. And as an entrepreneur, I feel we should be flexible and we should keep evolving based on the feedback that we get. So our Play in a Box is already in fourth iteration.
Okay.
So we keep our feedback loop very, very quick
Okay.
and evolve, change as per the requirements of children.
So user centric, of course, as you mentioned.
Yes.
That's a very important step.
Yeah.
And along this whole process of setting up an NGO and its legal issues, is there some legal issues or something that you want to highlight to people who want to actually contribute to the society, who are looking to possibly start an NGO in the future?
Mm-hmm.
That's something that they should know and should focus on or avoid those
Right.
pitfalls.
So, from a legal standpoint, I feel as a non-profit you can register as a society, as a trust, or a Section 8 company, and you can obviously search about them and see what fits best into your alignment area. A new CSR rule has come based on which only Section 8 companies can receive CSR. So that's a good idea to register a Section 8. It has a lot more compliances. It is a lot more similar to, say, a private limited company. There are directors than a society or a trust. But again, based on the cause that you have, if you want to be in a small area but
Right.
have a deeper impact, maybe a trust or a society would make more sense for you. We decided to register as a Section 8 company. The compliances are much more, and as an entrepreneur you really don't want to spend your time in compliances, legal, finance, but they are so important. And I wish I had given it more time when I was in my early days, because after a year I realized, we didn't do this properly, we didn't invest in a proper CA, we tried to do everything ourselves to save costs. But it's good to keep these things right from the very beginning. Have all the agreements in place, follow all the MOUs that you've signed, right? Like MOUs seem these long boring documents, but oh my god, so important and especially as a non-profit, because you have to get your certifications like 12A, ATG and FCRA. If you do not follow these compliances, getting these certifications will become difficult. So you might be doing amazing work, but if you don't do proper paperwork, you might be in trouble. So we are also learning, and I feel I can list down the list of mistakes I have done for people to learn that don't do those things in your company.
Of course, exactly like you mentioned, it's a big thing. The legal document, the legal process, all that is pretty scary to people, especially new entrepreneurs. Yeah, but it's something that will help you in your future, right? Especially for things like grants and all. I'm guessing, right? They would, of course, require that you have everything set up properly. And is there some community that they should be part of if they wish to? Is there something online that they can utilize, or communities that they can utilize, organizations out there which will help them in progress?
So I have been a part of multiple communities. As a non-profit, I think we were a part of this incubator at NSR Cell and also at ENCORE, so that made my circle of non-profits. But I'm sure there are more communities of non-profits that people can be a part of. I've also tried to keep my communities a little more diverse and not just typically NGOs. Like I was a part of Startup Leadership Program. I was also a part of RC Fellowship. So, which was basically, we had a lot of innovators and makers, and it really matters the communities that you are a part of, because they are the people who support you, who lift you, who connect you with people, opens up opportunities for you which might be very difficult for you as a single person or a single company to do. So I think there are different communities out there, and it's a good idea to be a part of it. I think for me it was a little easier because I love meeting people and I have this extrovert personality. But I know friends who feel a little uncomfortable, doing a lot of these interactions. I think for them now these online communities have come up, which might be a easier, a more comfortable place to network and get to know the right people. I think LinkedIn is another great place to just meet like-minded people. And what also helped me, so we do have these amazing mentors who helped me think long term, avoid those mistakes. But I also, I'm also grateful for these people who were, say, a few years ahead of me, you know, 4 years ahead of, I had just started out and they were 4 years into their company. So they were telling me exactly what is needed now. And that really helps. And with them you can really like ask silly questions and you know, like
asking silly questions is a very big part of this.
yeah.
Especially because you yourself have a limited amount of knowledge, right? Especially if you're starting young without much corporate experience, there's a lot you will not know.
Yeah.
So having a mentor is a big plus point at that point of time, right? And of course, you had also written a book at the start itself, and I'm sure that experience itself would have taught you a lot. You got to meet many people out there, and network is a very key point that people miss out. Right.
Yeah, so I wrote, honestly, like, I don't think I'm so much of a writer as such. Like, I got interested in writing this book because I wanted to meet those entrepreneurs, and it was so fun, you know, getting to know their stories firsthand. A lot of times I remember they used to get into the flow and they would tell a lot more details, and then they will be like, don't write this in the book. So
you should publish a memoir of that.
But it was I think the idea of writing that book was to make people understand that, you know, you don't need to be Steve Jobs or Bill Gates to start something. These were people just like you and me with limited resources. You know, you don't have to be a super genius to do a startup. And I don't know if that book inspired anyone. It definitely inspired me. From outside, entrepreneurship looks very fancy. So just meeting these people in person made me realize it's hard. And
it's a lonely path, right? Until you have people alongside you need to build that community around.
It is a lonely path, and your support system becomes very, very important. Just even today, like the highs and lows that I go through, like my friends have started laughing now. Yeah, okay, you'll be fine by evening. But it's just good to have those people around you, and I think just being optimistic as an entrepreneur is also very, very sort of good thing to have to keep you going and not give up like when things get hard.
Right. So our previous guest, Deepika Chauhan, she mentioned a very valid point. Right. Go out there, experience it yourself, but do your homework always.
Yes.
I think that most people miss out on that aspect also, right? Doing your homework. Now, for you yourself, you had a validated idea at that point, right? Something that saw a good response, was covered in news and all, right? So that also is a very important aspect that people kind of snowball into, right? Without like head first, they'll fall into that and then realize, okay, it's something that needs to evolve. Right? So I think we'll be wrapping up here. Any last words, any advice to the youngsters out there looking to do amazing things now?
I actually feel very funny when people say give advice because I feel I'm still learning a lot of things. But I can definitely say things which my mentors have told me and what has sort of kept me going. One is like just having your you know, eye on your North Star. Like where are you taking this? And I think once that clarity is there, you'll be very, very focused, because a lot of times you want to do this, that, and a lot of things at a time, but just being focused is very, very important, and saying no to things which are not taking you to the path that you want to take. A lot of times we do, you know, there's a fine line between diversifying versus losing your focus. So being able to understand that difference and remaining very, very focused on what you want to do. The second thing that actually learned from one of my mentors, Krishna, he runs this company, Satva. So he took a session and he said that don't be scared to ask for help, because if you don't ask, then it's a definite no. I remember after the session, I just went straight to him and I'm like, you know, because you're told we should ask for help. And we actually
gave the list.
And he was actually like very, very supportive. We actually worked out of his office in Delhi for almost a year and a half, and
that's amazing.
the community that we got around, because they're a CSR consultancy company, the learnings that we had from people there was amazing. So yeah, I think just these two, I mean there are hundreds of lessons, but like these two, something that's go to.
Right. Again, amazing having you here. we can see the amount of experience. Though you are being very humble there is a lot of experience involved there, and so glad to have you on the show. Look
Yes.
forward to it.
Yes, awesome.
Thank you.
Yay, we're done.
Right, wrap. That's a wrap.